Hello, everyone. Okay, so welcome to our talk, Digital Developments for Dialects in Coptic, going here by Amir Zeldes. So Amir's going to give the second part of the talk. Before we get started, we want to thank some of our collaborators who are working on this project with us currently, particularly Schroeder, University of Oklahoma, as well as Lydia, Bremer-McCollum, and Hany, Takla. We also want to thank some of our supporters, the ADHO Division of Preservation and Access, ADHO Office of Digital Humanities, German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, Georgetown, University of Oklahoma, University of the Pacific, Humboldt University, and Canisius College. So before we get started, I just want to give a brief overview of what Coptic is, where it came from, and contextualize it a bit, since I imagine many of you in the audience don't know what Coptic is, or what it even looks like. So Coptic has ancient Egyptian has the distinction of being the longest continuously documented language on Earth. Very roughly, there are 5 stages of Egyptian listed here. Old Egyptian, 2600 to 2000 BCE, Middle Egyptian up to 1400, Late Egyptian up to 700, Demotic up to 400 CE, with some overlap here with Coptic. Obviously, these are very rough, but just to give you a general idea. Also, there's a fun mummy label here I've added to give you an idea of what Demotic looks like here. Here is a label for Nesmin the Elder. So after the 1st century CE, Demotic becomes increasingly rare outside of temple and sacred religious contexts. And because of this, the general population in Egypt lost a writing system essentially for their primary language, leading to an agraphia and increasing dependence on Greek for written communication. So because of this, Greek graphemes were adapted to represent Coptic with additional characters created to represent specific Egyptian phonemes that are absent, or Greek is not able to capture those phonetic values. Here on the right, you can see just an example of a school text. This is Greek. This is on an Ostracon, 3rd, 4th century thereabouts. Just to give you an idea, again, if you're not familiar with the Greek alphabet, which I know many of you are, what that would look like. So here is on the bottom here, you can see this is a piece we have at Duke, 6th, 7th century wooden tablet. It's a school text. On the other side, which is not pictured here, is a student practicing the alphabet, the Greek alphabet. On this side, on the top part here is a transcription to help you. This is a syllabary. And on the right here, you can see, just kind of smudged a bit, but these are the some of the, at least, Demotic-derived characters that are added to the Greek alphabet to complete the Coptic alphabet here in the Sahidic dialect. So there are various dialects in Coptic. Generally, these have been identified based on geographic region in Egypt. Moving from the bottom here, these are sort of the main dialects. There's lots of other sub-dialects, if you want to call them that. Here we have Achaemenic, Neapolitan, Sahidic, Oxyrhynchite, Fayumic, Bohairic. Sahidic is sort of what people call the classical dialect. Pretty much all research, certainly digital work done, has been on the Sahidic dialect. But some of these other dialects are really important for understanding ancient communities and groups, particularly Gnosticism, Manichaeism, as well as documentary texts that really give us insight into family life, things like that. For instance, at some of these ancient communities, like Kelis. And in the 6th century CE, Sahidic takes over as sort of the main dialect. In the 6th?
Oh, sorry, in the 6th century.
Yeah. Yeah, so 6th century Sahidic, and then later, right, by the 9th century, Bohairic displaces Sahidic and takes over at that point. And thereafter, we see an increasing presence of Arabic until, let's say, the 11th century, when Arabic completely takes over. These dialects continue to be copied and studied increasingly as sort of literary dialects. And Bohairic remains the official language of the Coptic Orthodox Church and continues today. So let's see. So these are just very briefly, again, these are sort of general stages to give you an idea of Coptic, the stages of Coptic literature. 3rd to 5th century CE, we have translations and expansions. Our earliest texts in Coptic literary texts showed as initially used very often just as Greek texts are translated and then they are expanded. We have also a lot of other magical and Manichaean works that are sort of original texts that are not translations in this period. 4 to 6, beyond translations, 6 to 7, sort of golden age, and 7th century and beyond, the sort of final literatures. Again, these literatures continue to be studied and copied, but increasingly less so after the 7th, certainly 9th century, as sort of living spoken languages. So moving on to our project, which is CopticScriptorium.org. So we're an open source, open access, and interdisciplinary research platform for Coptic language and literature. We offer texts openly accessible online in standardized machine-readable formats. We create virtual environments that enable globally dispersed scholars to work together. And we have natural language processing, or NLP tools, to process Coptic texts automatically, thereby generating searchable and annotated collections. We adopt the UD, Universal Dependency Framework, which various projects across the world are using, spanning over 150 languages. And this is a universal inventory of categories and guidelines that facilitates consistent annotation, for example, universal parts of speech. This is just a visualization to give you an idea of, well, one, a Coptic text above here. This is a incantation. This is actually a curse to give someone lifelong illness. And below, this is a diplomatic edition. So this text is available on Coptic Scriptorium. And just to give you an idea of the different views you can have of a single text, many of you are familiar with diplomatic editions. This is a sort of a one-to-one representation of the papyrus in this case. So it includes superlinear strokes. It tries to mimic the segmentation and breaks of the text, as well as the lacunae. So then we have a normalized text, which is a sort of edited text that, again, many of you are familiar with who work with editions. This incorporates versification, chapters, although in this case, there's chapters and verses for a curse, and not really relevant, but again, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. As well as the analytic visualization, which you can view on the website, which you can customize here, as you can see on the right, with these boxes to show you the Coptic text, parts of speech, translation, chapters, verses, pages, as well as the entities. And of course, you can see the translation here. It's very fun. Okay. We also have a tool called ANIS, which is a searchable database of texts and annotations. So on the bottom left here, you can just see a piece of it where it lists our corpora texts. So you can search particular text for certain, let's say you want to find a lemma, or you want to search a particular grammatical form or a certain kind of verb, or you want to search frequency or distribution across corpora or across a single group of texts. It's a very, as Amir says, a surgical search. So it's very powerful. So linked to all of the texts on Coptic Scriptorium are dictionary entries, which take you to CopticDictionary.org, which is run by our German partners. And from their end as well, if you search a particular lemma, they have links as well, which will take you to our tools. ANIS, which I just showed previously, if you click a link here on the right, one of the links, it'll take you to ANIS, and it'll basically, automatically fill in that box and say lemma, and show you other, where that lemma appears in other texts we cover in our corpus. So what can you search and read? We have quite a bit already up. Again, all of it's in Sahidic. The largest groups, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Amir, are Bibles, so New Testament, Old Testament, or Coptic Septuagint, some people call it, as well as some of the luminaries of late antiquity, in particular Schroeder. You can see here some excerpts of Abraham our father, letters, another luminary base, and the Apothegmata Patrum, which are the sayings of the Desert Fathers, also a very popular group of texts. But we also cover, again, we cover literature primarily, not documentary texts. There are some exceptions where we have sort of subliterary, if you want to call them that, magical texts like this curse I showed. But some groups like Papyri.info, I know has some limited Coptic documentary texts, but so we're focusing on literature. But again, up until now, everything we have has been in the classical dialect of Semitic. And now I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So as Nick was saying, we have developed quite a bit of tools and texts for Sahidic Coptic. We have about 1.3 million words of Coptic in the Sahidic dialect available online today. But this leaves the other dialects kind of underserved. And when we ask people in user surveys what they'd like to see on the project, they obviously say, well, more texts, please. I want liturgical texts. I want literary texts. But one of the most requested sort of really groundbreaking or different features, if you'd like to call it that, is that dialects. And one of the most popular requests is Bohairic, which, as I've said, is the actual, or as Nick has told you, is the actual dialect used by the liturgical community of Copts today, which are a large minority of Christians in Egypt, about 10 million of them, and they use it for liturgical purposes. So the problem with this is that Bohairic is actually quite different from Sahidic, and that in order to be able to deal with Coptic at all, you need rather complex natural language processing tools to divide Coptic into phrases and separate it into words for reasons that I'll show you in a moment. And all of this enables you to do things like search by lemma and other kind of basic services that people expect. To illustrate why this is hard, I'd like to show you how Coptic words are written. So manuscripts, ancient manuscripts, are obviously often written just in scriptio continua, and you sort of need to know where the words start and end. The segment that you're seeing here is the one highlighted, starting here and ending, on the fourth line at the bottom over here. It actually contains two, I'll call them big words. If you work with Middle Eastern languages, this won't surprise you at all. This is exactly like in Hebrew and Arabic, where prepositions and pronouns are spelled together with whatever stressed lexical unit appears there. However, it's much worse for Coptic. So these things, which we call bound groups, can contain as many as 8 components, which is vastly more than Arabic or Hebrew. Coptic features verb-object incorporation, which makes it a lot more difficult to segment words, and generally the form of the stems changes a little bit like construct states in Semitic, but sort of worse. So it's all, it's a lot like a Semitic language, but worse. So here are some of the examples. This is from this manuscript in his deeds of, I guess I would translate this soul killing. Coptic is head first, so soul killing is literally nes kill soul, so soul killer nes, just it's backwards in Coptic. And the of is a separate word in the sense that it has a different part of speech. This is a preposition and this is a noun. But the noun itself contains multiple components, which is this sort of nominalizing nest-like thing, this agent, affix, ref. And this soul kill, in which you might recognize the Greek lexical item soul, psyche, which gives the entire noun mintref psyche, which is actually just one noun, but has 4 units. So if you're interested in the use of psyche in Coptic, you would need to segment that word into its constituent parts. So we have 2 levels of segmentation, and essentially you can't conduct a search for anything before you segment. So this here, this is not the infinitive form of the verb kill. This is a reduced form, which appears in compounds. And this is a broken plural, so you need lemmatization. So a lot of reasons why you need natural language processing. So after a decade of doing this for Sahidic Coptic, we've got a lot of really useful tools. We've got morphological analysis, which is a combination of finite state tools and machine learning tools that sort of decide together what to do based on the information that they have. We now have small, sort of micro-sized transformer-based language models in Coptic. We wrote a paper about that about 2 years ago. Tools for manuscript reconstruction, automatic normalization, part of speech tagging, NER, and syntactic parsing. And their current performance for Sahidic, or at least for literary normalized Sahidic, is quite good, especially things like segmentation now work quite well, which is very, very challenging. Lemmatization, part of speech tagging. Some of the other layers work less well. So for example, named entity recognition scores just shy of 94%, and syntactic parsing is not even at 90% yet. But we're working to improve these things, and they're already delivering quite usable results. Here's an example of a tool for lacuna reconstruction. We're actually presenting that next week at the Machine Learning for Ancient Languages workshop at ACL, if anybody's going to that or attending virtually. So this is for reconstructing gaps in manuscripts. But if you wanted to apply these tools to the other dialects, it actually turns out to be quite complicated. For segmentation, for example, if you don't segment anything in Bohairic, you would get a score of 35%, because sometimes it's correct to not segment anything. I mean, that happens. You might ask yourself how well you would do if you just look up all the forms in the training data and just use those, right? So a lookup solution, you get almost 70%, because the most common words appear lots of times, so they give you a lot of score. What would happen if you used a Sahidic trained tool? Actually, you would do less well than looking things up. You would only get 46.91%, which is catastrophic. So you cannot simply use the tools for this other dialect and hope that they will work. Tagging and parsing is not as bad. Actually, you can get just a few percent degradation because word embeddings are good and they recognize certain similarities. But for segmentation, it's absolutely not doable. So our current work is focused on designing tools for Bohairic and starting with guidelines, really, because Bohairic has additional letters that Sahidic doesn't have. Bohairic has different forms that are easily recognizable as related for a human. So Rome, man, becomes Romi. Etbe, on account of, becomes Etbe with a theta. So that's all fine. But tools need to be trained to recognize these. So basically what we're doing is fairly traditional. We're establishing the guidelines for the analysis of Bohairic, which are not trivial because you need to decide what counts as a word, which is not exactly the same, how the parts of speech tags apply, which is sometimes a little bit different from Sahidic. What is the lemma here? And we're now working on a project for what we call hyperlemmatization, which is lemmatization across dialects. So deciding what is the corresponding form and linking the forms across dialects. And with these guidelines in hand, we're working on producing a gold standard tree bank, which will be part of universal dependencies, much like our Sahidic tree bank, which is already the universal dependencies. And then we use these tools that we train on the data, correct the resulting outputs, and retrain the tools in this kind of virtuous cycle, which will be familiar to many of you. It actually turns out that for some tasks, you can even use joint training. For example, syntax parsing, especially if you're parsing Bible, because it's the same text, actually ends up benefiting from training on the corresponding Sahidic text and the Bohairic text that we have. This is not true for other tasks. So you cannot jointly train a segmenter, but you can jointly train a syntactic parser because the syntax of both dialects is quite similar, even though the words are different. This is the same verse from Mark 5:1. In terms of interfaces, we invite all interested parties to use our data. The top link here is for close reading, where you can just read Coptic texts in different visualizations, diplomatic, normalized, with linguistic analyses. The ANIS interface, which Nick mentioned, for sort of very exact search, as well as NLP tools, which are actually useful for people in reading groups or in the community, because very often when you look at a long Coptic word, you don't know how to segment it. And the NLP tools will very quickly make you a suggestion as to how what you might be looking at here. And now for the first time, they support Bohairic. It's not as accurate as it is for Sahidic, but it's coming along. In terms of Outlook, we're trying to do what our users want us to do, which is to add more texts. For Bohairic, we're now mainly doing Bible, but we plan to add more Bohairic texts, specifically Saints' Lives. The life of Isaac might be next, like Shinute, and a variety of historical or pseudo-historical texts, as well as more Sahidic texts. We haven't stopped adding those. And we are also engaged in a project of adding modern Arabic translations rather than just English, especially for users in the Coptic community and in Egypt. You can also see us start to integrate Bohairic vocabulary into our aggregate visualizations, some of which you can find on our website, such as breakdowns of entities and their types and lexical items and how they're used in phrases. So we're hoping to add Bohairic into these existing tools, which currently only rely on Sahidic. Yeah, that's about it. I'd like to thank our team members again. This is a big project with lots of volunteers who are listed on our website. Some of the main ones are listed here as well. And we'd like to thank everyone for listening and answer your questions. Thank you.